Okay, welcome everybody. It's the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick, he's Joe, and I'm in the, I want to say in the barn, but that's not true. I'm in the studio with Joseph tonight. I'm in Ottawa, rather than being out on the farm, and it's always, it was a gorgeous day today. It was almost 60 degrees.
I don't know what it was in Fahrenheit, but I saw on my computer that it said it was 17 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, that translates to about 65 or 66 degrees.
It's 20 degrees is about 68
72.
degrees. 20 degrees Celsius
is 72 degrees.
No, I don't think so. Well, it's in that range anyway. Whatever.
Yeah.
Let's not quibble over a degree or 2 or 3
or 4.
So, anyway, let's just say that I wasn't wearing my winter coat today.
No, you wouldn't need it.
I brought it. I had it in the car, but I didn't wear it.
But you know what? It's habit. Like, I get in the car, and over the course of the winter, I have a leather bomber jacket I wear, and I put a heavy hoodie underneath that. And that is plenty warm. I'm comfortable. I put it on today, and boy, what a mistake. That car was warm. I had the heat turned down. I had to run with the window open.
Yeah.
Oh, darn.
Life is just terrible.
I'm telling you, nobody has it rougher than we do, Joseph.
Nick, you're spilling tea all over the place.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, well, while Nick is cleaning up his mess,
yes,
let's do our housekeeping, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, we are coming to you from the Think Radio Broadcast Center in Canada's nation's capital of Ottawa, and we're not going to reveal our location any further than that because we can be controversial from time to time. Anyway, we're going to set that aside for a minute. Housekeeping stuff. If you want to join the conversation live, you can do so in our chat room. All you have to do is click on the bubble, the chat bubble or comment bubble in the live player, and you may have to register, or you may have to log in if you're already registered, and that's just to ensure that you're a real flesh and blood human being, not a malignant algorithm.
We don't like malignant algorithms.
Especially the ones that are intent on interfering with our thought processes, our free association, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, great to have you in the studio, Nick. It always is. But, I have to tell you, the sound quality last week with you remotely, me sitting in the studio, to be perfectly honest with you, you sounded better than I did. And that's because afterwards I was listening and going, okay, there's some metallic quality to my microphone, which is really weird because we have high-end microphones here.
We do.
We are professionals.
We do not cut
We're
corners.
Broadcast professionals.
We do not cut corners.
Okay, and we may not make a lot of money as professionals, but, we do make a little teensy bit of advertising money.
Stress teensy.
Yeah. So if you guys want to help us out,
send us a big fat check.
You can send us a donation, or you can just tell your friends and neighbors about us, and they can listen. And let's let the free market
rule.
Let the free market provide for us.
That's right.
Anyway, enough banter, Nick. Let's jump right into it.
Okay. You were telling me earlier, but while we were doing our pre-production meeting, about a situation over in the Middle East, about something that the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel are working on, if they haven't completed it already.
Well, they're in the process of negotiating, I understand, what's the term that they use? The corridor that is gosh, I can't remember the term they used for it now, Nick, but it's a corridor, a no quarantine corridor. Or words to that effect. I'm not sure if that's the exact terminology they used. But the idea being that both Israel and the United Arab Emirates now have a very high percentage of their population that has been vaccinated against the COVID-19 virus. And by that I mean both inoculations, if you're using the vaccine that requires 2 doses. And they've seen they're in the process of seeing the rates of infection in their populations plummet. And certainly in the case of Israel, they're in the process now of reopening everything. And so the question now becomes, why should we continue to have restrictions on travel to and from countries that have had the same kind of success with respect to the elimination or the tamping down of the coronavirus? And the answer, of course, is, well, we shouldn't have these restrictions in place. So Israel and the United Arab Emirates are in the process of negotiating how they're going to allow free travel between both countries. And it's funny, because interesting how we're talking about that in the context of the COVID-19 and coronavirus and pandemics and epidemics, etc. When, just 2 years ago, we wouldn't have even been having this conversation, period, even with everybody in both populations being completely healthy. So it just goes to show you, for all of you people out there who are not Donald Trump fans, and if you listen to our show, I have had my share of difficulties, let's call them, with Donald Trump, okay? So, I'm not a perfect fan of Donald Trump by any stretch of the imagination. But you have to give credit to the man where it's due.
That's right.
And it frustrates me to no end that liberals and people out there on the left of the political spectrum, including all of those people out there that are on the left, they're parked on the left, but don't realize how ideological they've become. It's just become so natural to them. But these guys are so anti-Trump that they refuse to recognize all of the good things that he did. And, it's unfortunate that his personality perhaps muddied the waters.
He was a little
perhaps
grating.
To a certain degree, he was an author of his own destiny in this respect, to a degree. But,
yeah. Now,
but still,
there is a Canadian, I won't say connection because that's not accurate, but there's a scenario within Canada talking about the UAE and Israel developing and working on this corridor to allow the free flow of goods and people between their countries. Remember, the UAE and Israel aren't what you'd call best of buddies, but they understand economics. They understand that both countries need some things the other country can provide.
Right.
So the economic benefit trumps their political disagreements. I'm putting it rather mildly. So when you look at two countries like Canada and the United States, and by comparison, we have nothing to complain about. We have basically the same philosophies. We have basically the same outlook on life. And I'm painting in pretty broad strokes here. But if the UAE and Israel can hammer something out, why can't we? Because the best we've got so far, because the border's still closed to vehicular cross-border traffic. You can fly in and out, and that's what I'm heading for with this conversation, but you can't drive over let's say, the Ambassador Bridge at Windsor or the Rainbow Bridge or the one at Sarnia, the Peace Bridge.
Right. Well, you can under certain circumstances.
If you're a truck driver.
If you're so-called an essential service.
Well, that's what I mean.
Right.
But for average, like if you want to go and visit relatives, I have relatives in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I've got them in Lansing, scattered around Michigan, that if I ever took it into my head to go see them, I can't because it's not considered an essential trip. So the question becomes, if Israel and UAE can do this, why can't we? Now, when you fly into this country, the government has come out with this idea about putting people in quarantine hotels.
Right.
Some people are doing it. It's a 3-day quarantine, which I have a question about, which I'll ask in a moment. But some people are just walking right through them. They just, they go through the checkout, they get their baggage, and whoosh, they're gone.
Right.
And so what's the point of doing it unless you can enforce it all along? And secondly, the question about the quarantine hotels I have in the first place is, if it's only 3 days, what are you going to learn? I thought it took 14 days.
Well, 3 days or 4 days. That's a great question. We haven't actually talked about these quarantine hotels much on this show. We haven't concentrated on them. But this is a real problem, okay? Mm-hmm. The first thing is, how long does it take you? Well, okay, no, let's even go back further than that. Before you even get on the plane coming to Canada, you have to have a test. And it's a negative test. So you test negative, and then you enter the country, and then you have to quarantine for 3 or 4 days. I can't remember what it is exactly, at your expense. And then, if there's no problem after that, then you get to quarantine for the rest of the 14 days in your home. So what is the point of the hotel quarantine? I don't know. But I do know that there have been a number of people who've been coming through who have basically given the finger to the government officials at the airport that are basically saying, okay, this is where you have to do for your quarantine, etc. And they're saying, yeah, no, I'm going home. Just try to stop me. And of course, there's no mandate for these officials to stop anyone, so people just get their bags and walk right out.
And that's
now, just to address, Nick, your question about enforcement, obviously, okay, when you come in, there's paperwork and identity cards, etc. So they know who these people are, and presumably, the health department or whatever, whomever, is going to track them down and fine them. And then the question will be after that, will those fines hold up in court? Now, the Canadian Constitution Foundation has launched a charter challenge to those hotels.
Right.
They have, I believe, 5 people who have agreed to be the litigants in the case, and the Canadian Constitution Foundation is going ahead and pushing that case forward. So we'll have to see over time how it handles or how it comes down. But I think the issues that you've raised, at least initially, are very good. But there are more important issues, okay? For instance, let me give you an example, a real-world example. If you're an American or you're living in the United States,
right,
and your mother has a health problem, and you have to come up to be with her on compassionate grounds, you can request and are normally granted an exemption from the hotel quarantine. So you can get an exemption. Now, hang on. All right. This is the kicker, okay? If you're a Canadian and you go to the United States in the similar circumstances, your mother is ill, you have to go down on a compassionate visit, okay?
Right.
And you come back to Canada, you cannot qualify for that exemption. Now, that just doesn't make sense.
Well, this harkens back to the nonsense surrounding funerals at the height of the whole COVID thing in 6 months ago, when they limited funerals to 10 people. And now it's unheard of today, not many people, but what if somebody had 11 kids? I went to school with a family of 21. Okay, so you got to pick who's going to be at the funeral and who's not?
Yeah, the whole thing is absurd.
Of course it is. And this is the same kind of mentality. On top of that, as I have said from the very beginning, I would take this a lot more seriously if the government did. You've got nonsense like this. You've got a porous border where at places like Roxham Road, I think they've closed it now, but for a long time, it was open. People could walk over the border, no testing, and they got put up in hotels, given money, and where are they? Were they COVID positive or not? If this disease was as dread as they say it is, why was that allowed? Why were ministers of the Crown flying to Barbados and down into the Caribbean over Christmas and Easter? Why was that all allowed? It's do what I say, not what I do. The hypocrisy is what drives me crazy. So now you have it where you've got these people in Canada coming in, and they're told they have to sequester themselves in a hotel for 3 days, and the next, 12 days, they have to do it at home. And you're right. They flip the bird and say, no, I'm not playing that game, which I wish a lot more of us would do. But, kudos to them for doing it. How is the government handling this? Are they insisting? No. They're letting them go.
Well, I don't know that they're letting them go. They're not stopping them physically.
Well, if you don't stop them,
airport.
If you don't stop them, then you're letting them go.
Okay, but they're still quarantining, so I assume they're self-quarantining.
And how do they know that?
Well, that's a different question entirely, right? But they don't get off scot-free, and nobody cares about it, and nobody does anything. And by the way, just to be clear, I'm not defending the policy here. Okay, I don't think we should be doing